just so thankful to be in this place with you. There's no other place I'd rather be. There's no other people I'd rather do this with than the people right here in this room. And I honor you and I thank you. And I just praise you for your hunger and your pursuit of the Lord. It's important for me to honor your pursuit as much as it is for you to honor mine. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for who you are and for what you do for the Lord, what you do for this local church and this local body, and the way that you love one another. May you continue to do those things well. May you continue to grow in those things as we do that together. I was listening to Tim just then as we got ready to transition, and I think those words are just so true for us in that here you don't always know precisely what you're going to get on a Sunday morning. You know, we have our plans, we have what we think we're going to do, but ultimately our goal, and we don't always do it perfectly, but our goal is to be yielded. And last Sunday, we got to see a little bit of that, and I think it's a frequent thing that we see here, that the Lord just began to just do different things. It's not always the same thing. It's not always the same expression. And to be honest with you, there are times that we experience things that we as a leadership group don't know entirely what to do with. We don't. And so we just figure it out as we go. We take one step at a time, and we just learn to yield and just see what it is that God has on the other hand. But I think that that's one of the things that oftentimes gets in the way of our growth. It gets in the way of our pursuit, is this desire to always want to understand everything before we take the next step. In my other job, in consulting, I have to travel frequently, so it requires me to get on airplanes about every month, and I go to different states and different places, and I do what it is that I do. But to get there, it requires me to get on these massive airplanes, these big Boeing aircrafts. The tires are literally larger than me. If I stand next to them, they're taller than I am. They're just these huge aircrafts, and if I were to stand up here and to tell you I understand precisely how lift and thrust works to get 250 people off the ground with an aircraft this large, and it somehow stays afloat the whole way down. Like, I don't know that I could completely describe that. And I understand there's some of you in the room that could tell me the science about how lift works and all this other great stuff and show me a picture of a bird and a wing and describe it, and that's great. But the point is I don't understand it completely. But it never keeps me from getting on the aircraft. It never keeps me from trusting the process. Even when in springtime, turbulence gets really bad. There's a lot of air temperature changes and things like that. So this time of the year, the plane will go through some intense turbulence and things get rocked around and shook around, and you got to stay buckled up and gripped down. I mean, the lady next to me at one point grabs both arms. I mean, she took over my arm. You know how you try to fight for that middle arm on the airplane? Okay, for those of you flying first class, you're not having to fight. But the rest of us, we're fighting for that arm there. And she had a full grip of both of them. I mean, and just these big eyes. But there is a trust in the journey that we're going to get from where we're at to where we're going, even though there's not a complete understanding about how it all works. You trust the pilot. You trust the engineers. You trust everything else that happened that's going to carry you through that process. The thing is, if you want a peace that surpasses all understanding, you have to give up your right to understand. If you want to experience a power that transcends all of your control, you have to give up your right to be able to ascertain and understand precisely how that works. It's not to say that we throw understanding and knowledge and intellect out of the window. No, of course not. We pursue these things. We seek understanding, right? We want to know them, but the lack of knowledge itself does not keep us from entering inside the place of trust to experience it by way of encounter. Amen? You are like, what is he talking about? I thought we were having a graduation service. We are. But this is going to help us. It's going to help our graduates, and it's going to help us as a church. Because the thing is in this place of life, when we go through these big transitions, when we're going through transitions of graduating high school and going into college, when we're going through these transitions of experiencing God's presence in ways that we never have before, when we're getting the new job or walking in a new relationship, we are constantly being confronted with things we've never experienced before. Do you want me to tell you the best kept secret that I wish everyone who seemed like they knew what it is they were doing would have told me? They don't know what they're doing. I'm a consultant. I'm a paid expert of my field, okay? Half of the problems I encounter, I don't know exactly how I'm going to fix them. Do you want to know why? Because they're never before experienced problems before. That's why we get paid the big bucks. It's because we have the knowledge and skills and trust to solve the problem, but we're initially presented with it, we might not have the solution. But the point is you have to trust the process if you're ever going to get to where it is that you're going. It's not so much about knowing the solution when you begin, but it's trusting the one that you're walking through the process with. And so this is where we're at. In Colossians chapter 2, verse 6, it says, "So then, just as you receive Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live your lives in Him, rooted and built up in Him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, overflowing with thankfulness." And we talked a little bit about the importance of thankfulness this past Wednesday. If you're not sure what that's about, you should come to Wednesdays. So what we want to understand here is, notice in Colossians, it says, as you're receiving Christ as Lord, you have to continue to live your lives in Him. So though you've achieved a thing, you've received a person, you've gotten the degree, you've finished the process, you've gone to the next stage in life, there is yet still more. You don't just graduate from a thing, you graduate to a thing. You realize I'm talking to more than just graduates in here. You see, it's not just for those two. The whole room's about to get a little dose. So you're not just graduating from a thing, you're graduating unto a thing. Because what you just went through was supposed to prepare you for. Your process should always equal preparation. What you're going through, God is using to equip you, to position you for what it is that He's designed for you. This is the beauty of life and walking with God, is that you are always, yes, always going through process. You think it's going to be over when you hit this mark. Like, I remember I had all of these goals and things that I wanted to do by certain ages. I think I've shared some of this before. But there was all these things I wanted to do. And thankfully, I feel like I've hit most of those. But what I found out, as soon as I got to that goal, I was like, oh, okay, now what? You know, you get to the pinnacle in the mountain, and it's beautiful. We celebrate it. It's awesome. It's an amazing thing, and this is a joyous time. But then you realize that only positioned you for greater vision. You only climbed the mountaintop so that you could see more clearly. And now, having seen more clearly, you're positioned now to begin to do the things that God is calling you next into. You don't just do a thing and get to stop. You do a thing and get equipped to go. Most of you would maybe contend and argue that what it is that the disciples accomplished by walking with Jesus for 3.5 years was the greatest accomplishment of their life. It was like, you know, they didn't just walk with the greatest prophet of all time. They walked with God Himself. And if that's confusing to you, we talked about the Trinity last Wednesday. And if you want to know more about that, you should come to those. I'm not subtly plugging, am I? Okay, anyways. So you would try to make the argument is they got to walk with God Himself. This is the greatest accomplishment. The greatest thing they could have ever experienced. Well, and then Jesus goes. He goes to be seated at the right hand of the Father. And now he says, now do the same works I did and even what? Greater. So in other words, it wasn't that this was the greatest thing they would ever experience. It was supposed to be a process they went through that positioned them for more greatness, that they could only encounter on the other side of going through the process. So you've got to quit seeing your process as something that you have to graduate from and start seeing it as something you have to submit yourself to. You don't just go through the process and graduate from it. You submit to it so that you can become everything that God has designed you to be. It's so that He can remove everything that needs to be removed. It's so that He can build everything that He wants to build. And yes, sometimes that means it's going to be ugly. Sometimes, when you wake up first thing in the morning, you ain't your sexiest self. Like it just don't. It ain't all right. You got the eye booger in the corner. Your hair's out the way. It's just not good. You know you got the t-shirt from 10 years ago with 4 holes in it. Like, you're just not looking your best. And that's okay. Why? Because you know that getting ready is really a process. And when you get ready, you got ready for a thing which is more process. You didn't just get ready and say, I've graduated. I've got things now to do as a consequence of going through the process. But some of us get so caught up of how difficult things are and maybe how bad things look when we're in the middle of what we're going through, when we're in the middle of being formed, that we abort the issue. We abort the process. We abort what it is that God is trying to do in us. And when you abort the process and do things in your own time, you end up creating an Ishmael instead of an Isaac. And so what happens is illegitimacy comes out and you try to walk in a promise you have no grace for. Because that wasn't designed for you. Because you tried to manipulate your way in there, but you realize that as you yield, that God is beginning to reform you and refashion you. And even though things don't look exactly the way that you want them to just yet, you're exactly where you need to be in the potter's hand. Listen, when a potter is forming something, as it's being spun, it doesn't know what up is down and side and back, and it gets lopsided, and this spot's wet, and this spot's way over here. It looks crazy. Have you ever seen somebody spin something on a wheel? It's just this big lump of clay, and then they just go, and then they go, and then they take more water, Holy Ghost, anyways. And then there's just all this stuff that's happening, but over time, there is a forming that is taking place. But if you catch them in the beginning or in the middle, ever before the end, nothing looks quite right. You might not even be able to make out what it's supposed to be. And if you don't take your time and be patient with yourself as you're going through your journey, what you look at sometimes will be scary. It will be intimidating. It will be something altogether different than what you thought it ought to be. But I'm telling you, you are safe in the potter's hand when you will trust the process and trust the one who is directing you, who is guiding you, who is equipping you, who is walking with you through all the things in life. You will come out more whole than you've ever been before. You will come out more equipped to carry the glory, which is the things that He wants to put on your life when you submit to the process. Don't be so eager to graduate from it. All you do is graduate to more process. So slow down. Why are you in a hurry? Your speed will just end in your delay. It will. 100% of the time. I remember when I was first graduating high school, there was all of these first graduating, like I did it a couple times. The first time didn't stick. I had to go a couple more. But as I graduated high school, I had all these things that I wanted to do and these pieces. And I just remember frantically just trying to figure out, how is this going to work? What am I going to be? If I get the wrong degree, then am I going to get a job? Like all of these things are going through my mind. And if you saw where I am today, most of what I did has nothing to do with what I'm doing today, right? Like all the things that I spent all my time worrying about, you would say they just kind of happened to me in a sense. I believe it's the Lord's hand. But the thing is I could have never planned the way my life was going to unfold. I could have never planned the way all this was going to happen. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a plan and a strategy and doing things that way. That's great if that's what you have going on. But the point that I'm trying to settle for you is above all else, above the plans, above all the things that you want to accomplish, trust in the Lord and trust in the process, that eventually God will position you right where you need to be when you completely place your trust in the palm of his hands. Philippians 3, verses 12 through 14. Not that I have already obtained all this or have already arrived at my goal, but I press on to take hold of that for which Christ Jesus took hold of me. Brothers and sisters, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind, straining towards what is ahead, I press on towards the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. So, one of the things that Paul is highlighting, if you read the verses ahead of this, it seems like Paul is really doing a lot of boasting. He's talking about all his credentials. Hebrew among Hebrews, very well educated, done all of these different things, but then he caveats all that and says, you know what? Regardless of all the things, regardless of all the process I've been through, regardless of all the milestones I've hit, regardless of everything on my checkbox and yours that you've placed on me that I've already checked off, Paul's going on to say, is I still don't see myself as done. I continue to put my eyes on the prize. And this is something that is so important that I lose sight of more frequently than I ought. And it's this: when you're in the middle of going through the process that God is taking you through, you must not get distracted from your purpose. Get so caught up in the cycles, get so caught up into what it is that I think it is that I need to do in this moment that I lose sight of the why behind what it is that I'm doing. That behind every decision and process is a person. Every degree and pedigree I have ultimately impacts people in some way, shape, or form. You're about impacting a life. Yesterday I was reminded of this. We took the kids out on the river and we went to the sandbar. And we get back from the sandbar, and it was a little bit stressful, just a little bit. I have young kids, and I tell you what, those ski boats and bass boats just don't go. I mean, them jokers throw some 3-foot wake, and I'm like, this ain't no ocean boat, folks. We need you to help us out here. Okay, I got 2 kids and a wife, and so things no intense fellowship, just a little stressful. And we had made some last-minute dinner plans, and we were getting ready to go to dinner, and I was literally stripping the kids down to the back. This is South Georgia, y'all, okay? Stripping the kids down to the back of the truck, just like we got to get them changed. There's dirt in every crevice. I'm like, okay, give me a towel, some baby powder. The baby powder's the trick, parents, in case you didn't know. You just don't do it inside the vehicle. Do it outside. So I'm over there. I'm just trying to get the dirt off my kid and get them dressed and go to the next thing. I'm just caught up in, my process. And I hear this voice behind me say something, and I'm like, what is this? Because I'm way out in the parking lot. It's a busy day on the river, so we like several rows out from the landing. And I turn around and look, and there's this young lady who at the time it didn't quite register, but she appeared to be pregnant. And she was asking for something cold to drink. And she said, do you have anything cold to drink? And I remember in that moment, I'm wrestling with the kids. I'm a little stressed. And then I'm caught a little off guard, right? Someone comes in behind you and starts talking to you when you expect, we're safe here. And in that moment, I just remember my frustration taking over and saying, ma'am, I don't have anything on me right now. It's all at the boat. If you'll wait over there, I'll go get it in a minute. Like, that's how I responded. And I'm thinking, man, I was so caught up in what I was doing that I couldn't stop and think about this pregnant woman who was just simply asking for a cup of cold water. I didn't tell her to get lost or go about her way or to leave me alone. I was going to give her what it was that she was asking for. But my primary concern in that moment was, I got to get the kids dressed. I got to go get my boat out of the way because the next person's going to be waiting to dock. I've got to, all of my stuff got in the way of a person who had a legitimate need that I had a solution for. It cost me 30 cents. 30 cents. And honestly, they're sitting in the boat right now, hot. All it took for me was to take a little bit of time to realize the significance of the right now moment. To stop and say, yes, ma'am, why don't you just give me 1 second? I'm going to get him dressed and we'll walk down together and we'll go get you that cup of water. But if you'll just stay right here, I'll make sure that you get that. But no, instead it's, yeah, give me a minute. It's down there. I'll get to you in a second. Do you think that's really welcoming? Is that being very aware of someone's needs? No. But this is what we do. And maybe your moments look a little different than mine did yesterday, but I take that moment of transparency to say, I could have done that better. I could have done that completely better had I just taken a moment to put a person above my process. So as you're going through your journey, don't get so caught up in your journey that you forget what matters most. On your way to the top, on the way to achieving your biggest dreams of grabbing hold of the promises of God for your life, don't forget your why. Don't forget your purpose for all of the things that God gives you. That's why it says that a great fall and destruction comes before, or pride comes before great destruction and fall. Why? Because pride says, I'm going to look at myself. It's an inward focused thing. That's why pride is such a difficult trap. Because when you become self-focused, you do not have anywhere near the appropriate vision to see the needs around you. And when I say pride, it's not just this haughty, arrogance, egotistical mindset, but it's the subtlety of just seeing your own self above everything else around you. It's the moments when you've had so much fun out on the river, you miss the chance to give someone a cup of cold water because you're so busy. And even for me, it wasn't those moments I didn't say, hey, go away, but it's just a subtle distraction that says, you're not as important as this right here. It's the subtleties. And we have to begin to recognize these seemingly little things because it's the small foxes that spoil the vine. You think it's just something little. Oh, it's not that big a deal. It's that big a deal. And there's some opportunities you will simply miss. See, after I had that moment, and my wife and I start talking, and about as quick as it happened, I realized how bad it was. We start searching for her. Where is she? Could never find her. So your right now moments are a big deal. What you're going through right now is not just something you need to hurry up and push past, graduates. It's a big deal. What you're stepping into right now is a huge deal. The time that you have with people is a big deal. Miranda reminded of this very reality this morning. Of like when we come to church, are we just here going through the motions, or are we really pursuing God? Are we really hungry? Are we really going for what it is that He has for us? In your marriages, are you so busy about taking care of the kids and getting the food and going to the grocery store and paying the bills that you just lose sight of each other? Because you're just busy. And so you get the 10 minutes right before you go to bed, and even then it's like, hey, I've been touched all day. You stay over there, I stay over here, and you're on your phone. All these husbands and wives just start looking at each other. I'm not looking at mine. I'm not even looking at mine. But I'm talking about y'all. I've already been vulnerable. I ain't doing no more of that this morning. Be careful that in the middle of your going and your doing that you don't lose sight of your purpose. Matthew 19:26. Jesus looked at them and said, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. The context of this verse is they're dealing with a rich young ruler who sought to be with the Lord and realized that he had an issue that conquered his heart that was greater than God. And Jesus begins to teach them about the difficulty of what it is to sometimes follow God when other things have your heart above the Lord himself. And Jesus seeks to comfort them and advise them in this moment to say, hey, look, with man, this stuff seems so impossible to live out, to walk out, to do, to see, to experience. But he's like, with God, there is not a single thing that is impossible. This is one of the most important things that I think I can leave with both the graduates and others in this room. It's pursue God's promises without the fear of failure. I didn't say you won't miss it, but you pursue without the fear of failing, without the fear of missing it. Perfect love casts out all fear. As you pursue God, if you're always in the back of your mind thinking, well, it can't stay good that long. This isn't going to work out. As soon as I get here, then this other thing is going to happen. If I pursue this relationship with this person and allow them back in my life, it's going to fall apart. Like whatever it is that you're going through, maybe you're thinking about, graduates, you're thinking about the next step in life. Like, are you going to go right into the workforce? Are you going to go to college? If I do this route, is it going to work out for me? Is it going to go the way that I think that it should? And I'm just telling you right now, go for it like you can't miss it. Trust Him, listen to the Lord, and pursue Him like you cannot fail. Because if you're with Him, you cannot fail. You may have moments in your life where you seem like you're failing, but I'm telling you, there are moments where you're being equipped and empowered and built up and positioned to be victorious all the days of your life. You were not created to live in response to fear, but only the voice of the Father. The way that you live this out, the way that you pursue the things of God in your life without the fear of failure is to learn to only live in response to the Father. Jesus figured this out perfectly. I only do and say what the Father tells me to do. Only say what the Father tells me to say. How is it that He lives in victory? How is it that He kept Himself from being conquered and gripped by fear? It's that He had eyes but for one, and it's the Father. It's only seeing Him. Peter, as he walks on the water, fear only comes in when he becomes more conscious of the wave than he does Jesus. The more conscious you are of every wave in your life, it distracts you from your purpose and your destiny. When you're created to take the step out of the boat, you will ultimately sink if your attention and affection is everywhere else but the one who gave you the invitation to take the step. But if you will seize the moments and you will listen and yield to the voice in your life where God is speaking and saying, come, this is the way, you can trust that 100%. And as you pursue Him, you will be equipped to walk and do the impossible. But you only experience the impossible when you take steps into the impossible. And you will never take those steps in your life if you're conquered and gripped by fear. You can't. And every moment you don't take that step, you're choosing fear over love. Every moment that we respond to fear is a moment we allow the enemy to set our agenda. You think about that? Every time we do not live in primary response to the Father, you're actually living in response to the enemy. The moment you live in response to the enemy, you're allowing the enemy to set your agenda, not the Father. So there's these times that we have in our life that we can choose to live only in response to the things that God has spoken over us and to us for Him to be able to flow completely through us. See, our promises reveal our purpose. Our purpose reveals our value, and our value can only be found in God. Amen. When God gives you a promise in your life, whatever that is, there are many promises that are available for every believer. Freedom, healthy relationships, safety, provision, protection. These things reveal God's purposes for you. This is what He intends for you. These are the intended outcome that God has firmly placed in His heart and designed for you to have and live in. As He begins to release these purposes, He begins to reveal the value. What's the value statement in every promise and purpose that He's established? Is that I value love? Is that I value that you're cared for? I value you as an individual and your relationships and the things that God has called for you. But the thing is you will never find an authentic value in anything that you pursue apart from God Himself. Anything that you do outside of that relationship will ultimately not reveal a true depth to its value. But as we learn to pursue God and incorporate God in everything that we do, that everything we do is in Him, through Him, by Him, and for Him, then we learn how to truly carry the promises in our life.